Hello, hello. Thank you for being here on another rainy Friday afternoon. Last Fridays at 1:30 talk. Yesterday we have a few L series panels still going on, but we've got Nathan Lahy here, which is going to be really quite excited about his talk. I was telling him earlier, my kind of goal with these talks was to not introduce like best practice kind of knowledge, but like things that are tangential to that, right? The things which come at things from different angles and kind of shape, standard ways of doing. And I think your talk is kind of all about that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to let him introduce
All right. Thank you all. My name is Nathan Lahy. I'm one of the founding partners of Orbis Landscape Architecture with Ariel Barrientos. We both graduates of this program. I was 06, she was 19. We've been in business since 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. So it's great seeing a lot of familiar faces from the past here, and we didn't realize we get to present to so many famous alumni. But we've put together today is what we're calling unprofessional practice. It's a very academic presentation. There's things in here that may not go before clients, but there's still things that we absorb as part of our thought process and just existence in the world that we live in. So, with that sort of caveat, these are our opinions, and we have the utmost respect for anyone else's work we show in here, even if we speak critically of it. And so we have our parental advisory just in case, sorry mom, sorry God, sorry Terry. Sometimes we say things and show things.
If you click and then use the keyboard, it should be fine. Maybe.
Oh, got it too far. There we go. Thinking through it, we think about professional practice and in the sense of what happens every day in a traditional landscape architecture firm, and we don't tend to find ourselves to be that traditional landscape architecture firm. And so we've just kind of shared some things that are a little bit more traditional, that are a little bit different than us, that are still professional practice, and where we will in a second define what we mean by unprofessional practice. But just looking across the screen from your left, we have a rendering that is great, and it sells this individual's work. They have a very successful business. It's not really how we would render. We don't want to show things that are flowering at different times of the year and things like that and create a false sense of reality. In the middle, we have an email that we received recently that's been redacted, and I added some commentary too. And it's just more of, felt like it was someone playing politics and attacking us. We don't really know why. And our beliefs might be different than theirs. And their organization is very, very important. And even though that they're the little guy and they brought in 6 times more money than our business did last year, they're still the little guy. We want to make sure their voice is heard, I guess, but this isn't how I would go about doing it. And then this other one is a firm we have a lot of respect for. However, this project isn't Blair Middle School, Billy. At Maury High School. So that's all.
Not the same school.
But so just some different things that define a typical practice, and we're very atypical. And so when we look at the definition of unprofessional, what we really want to focus on here is contrary to the standards that are kind of expected from a design firm. And so we're going to kind of show you here today as sort of a process and how we think. It's kind of here's a digestion of my chaotic brain put into a presentation form that represents this point in time. From there, we'll also show you some of our work that kind of was built off of this sort of thought process. Pushing that button. So what we want to talk about is design language, and this isn't really a numbered thing. It isn't a sequential thing, or it's even a cyclical thing. It's just a layer of things that we feel are important and kind of influence our projects in different ways. They may not necessarily influence our work with all of these elements in each project. It's bits and pieces. And like I said, it's basically my scattered brain, a bunch of shit that's on my iPhone. So we go, as we run through these things, they'll come up, and we'll try to relate them and tie them all in. So the source, everything is essentially a copy of a copy of a copy. Virgil Abloh's 3% rule, standing on the shoulders of giants, which is something a faculty when I was here used to say all the time, but let's cross that out. I don't like it. Whose history are we speaking of when we speak of site history? Metaphysics of quality, and the universe never explains why. So the source. Source is sort of everything. It's when we talk about creativity and we think about the creative process and where do ideas come from. And the source is it's not coming out of us. It's happening around us. It's every single thing that we absorb all the time. And it's when do those things inspire? When do they create a seed that develops into an idea, that develops into a concept and ultimately a project? And so when we think about the source, this is basically where I talk about just random stuff on my iPhone, screen captures off Instagram, things you take pictures of on any given day and you'll never think about again, and then you reference 6 months later. And so when I think of the source, it's the source. And so just as a curiosity, gave this as a practice last week, and it was recommended we might take out OJ because generationally students may not know OJ. So who knows OJ? Yes. Why do we know OJ? For me, the OJ Simpson trial was like one of the first memories in my childhood of where everyone was engaged. And I remember where I was when the verdict was read. And my father references the JFK assassination as that moment for him. And so when that came up, we said, well, where's OJ come in now? And who was his murdered wife's best friend? It's Kris Jenner and Kardashians and all that nonsense. And so it's just all interconnected. It's here. And so just to reiterate that point and really put a plug in for this book I'm currently obsessed with, basically the Bible. It's Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act. Content does not come from inside of us. It's everything. It's already there. We don't need to think that we're creating new grandiose ideas. They're all there. So leads me into the next, which is everything is a copy of a copy of a copy. Chuck Palahniuk says this in Fight Club. He's essentially talking about when you have insomnia, but I think we kind of all feel like we might have it now. And so it's kind of a little bit relevant. So when we think about design, we think about, where do things come from? And we always say it's already been done. And so, it's already been done. We built a whole Easy Season 6 ad campaign off of it. It's already been done. So when I think about it and how does it relate to landscape architecture, and I think about landscape architecture, I think about Frederick Law Olmsted, father of landscape architecture. And then you look at who he was hanging out with, and he was hanging out with the Hudson River painters, and they were all doing this sort of, ephemeral landscape style painting that was very much fighting against the Industrial Revolution. And so when we talk about that and those painters and who were they inspired by, they were inspired by Claude Lorrain, who was doing these paintings in Italy in the 17th century. And then Thomas Cole, who was kind of the father of the Hudson River School style. He was doing these paintings in Italy in the 19th century. And then, we built Central Park in the 19th century, and everything is sort of just, it's there. So the source is there. It's where do we pull it from, and how does it apply to the work that we're doing at that time and in that sort of instance? And, and these each of these things have different relevancies historically, and what they mean today will mean very different 10 to 20 years, even quicker now. And so kind of building on that, building on, sense that everything is really already been done, and how do we make new? And so Virgil Abloh had always said, just change something by 3%, you make it new. It's essentially trolling, which I love. I feel like architecture school kind of makes us all a little trolly sometimes anyway. And so kind of taking on that and thinking about that idea, like what does that concept mean? And we look at the original Jordan that came out when I was a kid in the 80s, 90s, the one that Virgil Abloh did with Off-White in collaboration. And I mean, really the changes, air, quotations, the swoosh, the laces, a little bit of stuff here, just minor stuff. And Abloh was very inspired by Duchamp and the ready-made and all that, and how all that sort of was like, Duchamp putting urinals in museums. So when we think about that, think about architecture, and Virgil Abloh was essentially a civil engineer, I think. He's an engineer. Then he was like, oh shit, you can be an architect. Oh, so I'm going to be an architect. He became an architect, and then practiced a little bit, but he mostly is fashion is what he's known for. When he passed away unexpectedly years ago, he was the head of Louis Vuitton menswear. He was the first Black man in that role and sort of that journey. And so just by changing architecture, adding the quotes and dropping the chur, he's now established that an architect is all of these things. So I'll come back to that more in sort of our work. So standing on the shoulders of giants. This was a quote. This was I was in second year. We had a professor who had a friend who practiced architecture who would come and help teach, and he always was drawn to that one student that drew the best, and that was the greatest student. Everyone else was garbage. And Ariel was told that she would never be as good as that student was in her time, and now he kind of wants to come work for us. So full circle. But we think about it, I think I get what the point he was after was to kind of be inspired by these things. But I remember hearing the word copy. I don't want to specifically copy these things. So like when we talk about these giants, maybe we look more at like what their inspirations were and like what it was that we should take from them. And then I'll also go back to Abloh with, and he says, question your mentors, sort of that. So I'll show a few people that have kind of inspired my architecture journey, landscape architecture journey, and sort of where we question them and what we take from them. And so I like to start with Dan Kiley. It's like sort of, I think the first sort of obsession I had in school was his work. And then, so now when we look at it, he had this beautiful work in modernism, which is heavily grounded in concrete, which is a non-sustainable material, and then heavily maintenance heavy to keep these things pruned. And so we questioned those things, but Kiley knew his plants like better than I could ever even imagine knowing. He knew how the shadows were cast by the different leaves of different trees, and what he studied. And so Dan's like rebellious nature and like the way he kind of just like fuck you to Harvard and boom, like that's what I take away from it, and that's what inspires me from Kiley. And so like question them, but like don't obsess it necessarily. And so we got this guy. His first album came out when I was in college. We walked down to Crossroads and bought it at midnight, and it immediately changed culture, right? Like Kanye changed culture instantaneously. Don't know what the Speedo socks and the shoulder pads and Nazi shit is, or what happened. So that's really the question now. What happened, right? This is Rene Redzepi. He's arguably the best chef ever. He's #1 chef in the world multiple times. And what he's done is he's elevated rare natural ingredients, hard to find mushrooms and seafood and different things to the same level as we think of like foie gras and things that we eat in these Michelin star restaurants, which his is. But through that process, the copies and the reiterations and the reimaginings have all led to these ingredients becoming just decimated, and the habitats that they thrive in become decimated. And then also the culture of the restaurant to sustain it the way that they sustain. And so he's closing his #1 restaurant in the world because it's non-sustainable. He can't continue to push people this way. He can't continue to use resources this way. So his next iteration appears to be developing more products and doing more events and education. And so we'll see where it goes, but he's even kind of questioning himself. In recent times, that's Sir David Ajay, and it felt like he was doing this work that was very much in the realm of any other star architect, if you will, and elevating at this super high level, but at this very, very humble individual. And then with the recent news that has come out about him and what he's done to some of his colleagues that worked for him in Africa, and the assault that sort of happened is that everything he projected was really more of just like he's still just operating in that old white man sort of privileged world that we all kind of hear is something we hope wayside. And so we question that. And we're talking with a friend of ours who's an architect, and she works for an architect firm, and she is from Africa, and she says it sets Africa back, like the whole everything that happened here. And so like that separating the art from the artist, his work is still really strong. Can't question that, but maybe it's more of the work that was done by all of those people that are surrounding him, and it's not so much just him. Last one is Rick Rubin, who we referenced. I don't really have a lot of critical stuff to say about Rick Rubin at the time. I think Rick Rubin makes me criticize myself, makes me question pretty much everything. And if you're not familiar with Rick Rubin, it's kind of the reason hip hop existed. He founded Def Jam Records in his dorm room at NYU. Got in trouble because the mail room was full of records that were being shipped out to be distributed. He convinced the Beastie Boys to go into hip hop and not punk. He put Run DMC and Aerosmith together. He's done it all genres of music. And he's sort of this sort of guru. And so Rick makes me question me. So that's sort of where we've kind of come as we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So maybe instead of standing on their shoulders, we'll be more like Jack, take their shit and go back down the beanstalk to our humble existence. So that's where I am. Whose history? Whose history is very important. Our firm is in Hampton Roads, and that area is some of the oldest history of the United States. And we think about John Smith settlement at Jamestown, 1607. But Spanish were here in the 1570s. The English were here in the 1580s. And we talk about that history and whose history was that. So this was an image of Spanish when they came. So the Spanish came into the bay, encountered an indigenous man. They captured him, or he went willingly, or whatever. So it's the 1570s, we'll say. Took him back to Spain, took him to Mexico. He became Don Luis. He spent a decade or so trying to get them to come back and settle his homeland and set up a missionary. I mean, he showed them, he drank all the Kool-Aid, and within a few weeks of them settling a missionary in what we believe is like Yorktown area, he left and came back, and they slaughtered all the Spanish. And then the Spanish came and they slaughtered some of his tribesmen. And this was way before the English were ever here. So here we have some villages that were recorded in 1585 by John White. This was Chesapeake tribe. Chesapeake tribe was separate from the Powhatan Empire. They were connected to the North Carolina Algonquins. One of Powhatan's chiefs told him that a tribe would arise from Chesapeake Bay to wipe out his empire. So he went and slaughtered this tribe because he thought that's who it was. I'm sure that there's a lot more interconnectivity there when we talk about the Spanish being here and the different English that were here and all of that. And so we talk about whose history. And so, again, my favorite story here is the Georgia peach. Like what's more American than the Georgia peach that came from China to Europe along, the trade routes and the spice road, and then it came to the United States when the Spanish came and killed and raped and pillaged. And so that's the peach, and then it kind of was invasive and spread, and its history in the South was that it was not considered any value. The slaves were allowed to pick it, eat it at their will, until about the 1850s. P.J. Breckman's, him and his son, they founded a nursery in Augusta, Georgia, Fruitland Nursery, and they began to monetize orchard crops. And through this process, you had, and through the existence of the nursery, had the American Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of slavery. And so post-Civil War, it was realized that in cotton's off-season, all the work that needed to be done for the peaches and other fruit trees could be done. So now you still had that layers of sharecropping and keeping people kind of held down. And so these were just a few catalogs of theirs, and kind of starts, you can kind of read them close. You see how many, I think they're eventually selling like 1,000 different species of peaches alone. And this is just an image of the Fruitland Nursery in Augusta, Georgia in the early 1900s. And then this is the same property in the early 2000s. It's Augusta National Golf Club, where you have a lot of white people, and so it's whose history, like what was there. It wasn't just that. Where we practice history comes up a lot, and we talk about indigenous plant species and like where does that history come from. So it's just kind of important to know that, and how does it apply to your design, and that gets into source and 3% and everything else. And so metaphysics of quality, which is kind of where it's been kind of leading with this, is whatever you're going to do, if you're going to copy something or change it by 3%, or whatever that source comes from, like do it with intention, do it so it has quality. Now, when we talk about quality, how do we define quality? It's a difficult term. I've been reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance over and over since I was a freshman here. I've read it 8 or 9 times now through my life. And what that is about 500 pages of a man trying to define quality. And then he basically goes insane trying to do that. This is all real. He wrote a follow-up book called Lahy, which is another about 500 pages of him getting into the metaphysics of quality. And then ultimately, like what he comes up with is good as a noun or an adjective is all the physics of quality is all about. And so when we talk about that, we think about that, and we take, like, when we see something, we know something is quality. And my example here is it's a self-portrait by a photographer, and it's just someone out on their day-to-day. It's a celebrity out on their day-to-day. So it's pretty easy to tell like which one has quality and which one does not. And Kanye. So that's kind of our sort of overview. We'll talk about Universe Never Explains Why at the very end. But we kind of want to run through some of our projects now. So this is sort of our metaphysics quality, if you will. And so these are just a few different projects that we've done that kind of look at those elements we just spoke of. So this is a Vibe Butterfly Garden in Virginia Beach. This project was built in an undeveloped alleyway, 20-foot wide, 300-foot long. It's platted since the beginning of Virginia Beach. It's never anything. It was fenced off as part of an apartment complex. It was open, so open back up during a reconstruction project. And we thought it was still part of that property. And then at the end of that construction, we realized it was this public alleyway. It was just seeded with grass. And so what could it become? Owner of a coffee shop who is a good friend who wanted to be a landscape architect, but instead did like software engineering and then opened a coffee shop after he quit doing that. He wanted to turn it into a butterfly garden. So for this one, we would talk about our source, like our source is like leftovers, like Thanksgiving leftovers, because like that's what this is. It's leftover unused space. And so if you just make a 3% change to it by adding plants, like what does it become? You know, historically, the site was, as I mentioned, fenced off here. And then as this was put in and construction, we thought maybe it was access for parking or, you know, fire access or something extra. And then we saw this. And then that kind of led us here to, this is what was there. This is what is there now. This space has been taken over by residents and a nonprofit, and it's being maintained. And I think that's what we all kind of hope for when we do these sort of pro bono projects. And I think this one won an Virginia ASLA award a couple years ago. And it was a very, very heavy community project, very exciting work. And in the sense of, you know, everything's already been done. It's just a butterfly garden, but it's full of art now. People pass through it. It connects to a brewery. You don't have to walk on the sidewalks, and it's a little more inspiring. Regular Ass Sandwich. It's a real project, real place. They've moved from this site, but people that are taking it over are going to keep the great landscape. So when we talk about it, we talk about like essentially we have a sandwich and we have a regular ass sandwich. And if we take a landscape, can we have a regular ass landscape? And like what would that be? For us, that's kind of heavy and indigenous, adding, you know, bringing wildlife back to a space. This site was entirely paved, no real plantings there. And so it's kind of what we looked at before and how we activated the space and relocated the dumpster and brought in this sort of like native screening edge source here for us. We're talking about sandwiches. We're talking about stuffing as much plant material into this small space as possible. Was obviously for me the Dagwood sandwich from the old cartoons, the comics. But also like their whole marketing campaign is like skateboarding and like, you know, the snacks you ate when you went to the skate parks in the 90s and growing up. So like Trans World Skate Magazine and Skate or Die and, you know, the old Nintendo game. And it's funny, I showed this to someone and he immediately wanted to do his sandwich board at his restaurant with that. And this was not regular ass sandwich. This was a different sandwich shop. So we go, these are just some shots of our 3% change again, just by adding sort of this layer of landscape, removing just, we cut out the asphalt. City of Norfolk was great. I don't think anyone actually measured parking spaces to see that they were the right size or that the drive aisles were the right widths or anything, because it was all already there. And this is just looking from another angle. So this is all just taken out, taken over, and it's full of wildlife. And then going back to the beginning, email that we received about the native plants that we didn't use enough of on a project that we weren't paid for. There's a bee, and it's on this cultivar of a native plant, but we also have been told don't use cultivars of native plants. And then here's our thoughts on like there's wildlife not being able to find plants that aren't native. Everything's native to somewhere, man. Bees and birds, like they seem to visit fruit, and that's not native typically. So here's a few projects that we've done that we put on the quote landscape architect. This is not traditional or anything I ever thought I would be doing. This first one is the elephant in the room. This was a one-day sort of cultural conversation about what Norfolk could be. It was hosted at Norfolk State University by Pharrell Williams, put it on with his money. I don't think there was any tickets or anything. He just opened it and invited leaders and community members and artists. And it's a beautiful event, no music, just conversations. And we were called by a friend who owns a restaurant on a ride home and asked, you need to pull over and call this person right away. This was Sunday. By like Tuesday, we were like figuring out what plants to order, but it's basically we worked with a stage designer to create the backdrops and add landscape elements throughout the event space for the food stations, for the stage, for the VIP tents. So we thought about the elephant in the room, and like Ariel kept calling it the elephant in the woods. And so like think about like that elephant sort of being like enclosed in landscape, and then the stage was kind of an abstraction of an elephant. And so like how do we begin to fill that in? This is sort of like evolution of the stage, and some of it when it's lit up during the event, and then some of the other pieces that we did. And Billy's done this before too. Bennett's Creek Nursery lets us rent plants from them for this, and we take them back the next day. They do it at like a super discounted rate, and it's just been a great partnership to have, and like they like to be able to promote that as well. So this is another one of those projects. This is a mighty dream for them. This was a 3 to 4 day event that was the following year. It was kind of the follow-up to the elephant in the room. Again, Pharrell hosted. This was all over Norfolk, multiple locations. And so we were asked to do a few different things on this one, a couple different plant installations, as well as like a botanical sculptural installation. So same stage designer that we worked with previous year. Her name's Jocelyn Williams. She's in LA. She's incredibly talented. The stuff she did for the Mario Brothers movie was mind-blowing for like just a like release party. But here's our stage concept, and then botanical sort of installation was basically someone called me on FaceTime and showed me a pergola and said, "Hey man, can you hang some cool shit from this thing?" Okay. And so this was again like just a non-typical landscape architect where we got to build and create and just engage with the community. So stage during installation, this is our shit we hung here. And in the process, we did some table centerpieces and other things. Just this is like you don't have to go and work for 4 or 5 years, take your exam and get your license. This is how you can apply landscape architecture now while you're doing all that other stuff or figuring out what you want to do. Whatever it is we do. I've only ever known I wanted to do this. I decided when I was 16 I want to do this. I met with Mr. Allman, and now I'm here. It's part of the universe at the end. Sorry. This was a music video that we worked on. Dangerous Ways. Lundy is an artist we've worked with a couple times. We've done some stage designs for his album releases. And then Perfect Play is a platform that they're kind of like hype beasts, if you will, like cultural platform, but also tying in our local news. They manage artists, they manage local musicians, they do their own things with film as well. And then Fond is a incredibly talented visual artist, film and music team. And so this is our sort of source drawing for the music video. It was a live performance, so shot on location. I'm already talking probably too much, so I'm not going to show the video, but please check it out. It's very simple aesthetic. This is a drawing we did quickly to kind of represent our idea. Ariel wouldn't let me show her drawing, which was the real idea because it was her idea. So I did this one the other day. But for us, like when we talk about the source, like getting to work with all these other people, that's really like part of that source for us, because then we get to see how someone else's process works and like just how detailed someone can be. And like it opens up whole new avenues of thinking and projects for us. And we have several future projects planned with this team that we're working with. And so this was just kind of the sort of staging and settings and all of that and clean up. I tried not to be in the photos. And that was me. I was fat and I had long hair. And that was this year. Christ in St. Luke's Church. This is a very, very important project to us. It's in our community. We were like first project we're kind of the lead on, where we're bringing the team together. You know, it's a historic church in Norfolk. It has a lot of community importance, not just to the members of the congregation, but to the neighborhood. So they have this leftover space. Again, it's a garden. It's called the Lychgate Garden. It's really, Lychgate is just a style of gate. It has historical references to funeral practices. But it's an access. There's a pathway that goes here, connects to this door, which was the main entrance to the building. They're doing new construction. The main entrance is moving back here. They have some columbariums in the garden, but there's no real connection. It's the only path. There's a ramp to the sanctuary. The columbariums are over here. You have to walk through flower beds and lawns and everything to get to it. There's muddy Norfolk floods. This site was once a river. It's been the whole neighborhood for the most part was once a river. Current flood maps overlay perfectly with the 1800s maps of the waterways. So we're addressing flooding in the garden and bringing people to this sacred space, but also how do we make space for gathering and activities, because COVID made them realize they need these outdoor spaces to have these activities, but they also, how can someone have quiet solitude and remembrance and reflection with the columbarium? So just when we talk about history, you know, and we talk about that history. So this is North 1800s, and our site is here. This is Norfolk now. So all of this has been filled, as has this and this and this. And so the church sits here right at the end of the hay, which here was the creek, Smith's Creek. So this is zoomed in of the site. And when we started looking at this, we started thinking of not just the history of this church, but like the history of the Episcopal Church in the city of Norfolk and how that evolved. And so the site was empty, late 1800s. This is when the church was built, right when it was built. And we found this building, which no one seemed to know about. And it was a chapel of ease, essentially. So the big Episcopal Church was downtown. But, you know, when you just needed a little church on like Tuesday, I guess, you could go by the Chapel of Ease. And so there were a couple Episcopal churches. This one serves all of the Episcopal churches. So there's a history there that's not just of this congregation. It's richer and it ties more and more into the community. So that's just stuff we've uncovered looking through old maps. We did find some photos of it. Wasn't anything of significance. There wasn't any way to relate it back into the design. So as we worked through that, you know, we've just did some simple site analysis, and that was important to this. I think it was important to the process of us working with a congregation at this place that has literally members that have gone here for 70 years. You know, and so when we met with the church group initially, and or first we met with Ray Gendros, some of you may know, he was founder of Urban Design Associates. Ray basically told us he didn't think we were what he was looking for necessarily, but we should meet with the priest anyways. And we met with the priest, and he was amazing. And now we're here doing the project. But so we have the geological history and the waterways. So we think about those. And then we met with the congregation, and they talked about, well, I'm old, and this is how I experience the space, but like, how does my great grandson experience the space? And so when we start thinking about that, that immediately led me to, again, Thomas Cole, Thomas Cole's Voyage of Life paintings. So each of these is a series of 4 paintings of childhood, youth, manhood, old age. Each painting represents that part of a person's life. And so the river is calm at the beginning, it is tumultuous at manhood, it is you're at the ocean, you're at the end of the river at old age, the time of day, the seasons. So each of these things, they're all things that we think about when we're designing landscapes. So I can see why Olmsted and Vaux were maybe like copying these guys, right? And so we had the river, the physical river, the Smith's Creek, have these paintings because we're thinking about generational and things like that. And then we have, we're doing a garden, so we have to look at Van Valkenburg's book, Designing a Garden, on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Monk's Garden in Boston. So those were sort of the sources here for the project, and sort of that like copy of a copy of a copy, like 3% change and things was sort of where we were thinking with that garden, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. So this was our initial sketch. This was concept 1. This is what we did right after the meeting, right? Just getting something on paper, representing Smith's Creek. We had multiple waterways, and how do we weave through existing trees, and how do we bring people from here to this wall, but also back here? How do we create those different spaces? And so I believe this was concept 6. We did 3 iterations. We showed up to a few people, just to expand a few. This was 1 of 3 we showed to the church. 4, 5, and 6 were shown to the church congregation. A couple iterations came. We did a charrette with the congregation. At the end of that, we produced, this was 8. This is iteration 8. So we've defined our paths through the space, different layers. We've defined a memorial space. They actually want to do interment here. So they have the columbariums here, but those have a finite amount of spaces. So once they fill up, they actually want to be able to pour ashes into the ground here. So we've created that area. We've created a lost child memorial, a large gathering space, and then tucked in these sort of pockets of areas to sit and reflect and have solitude, kind of offered it all with various types of plantings. So this is iteration like 12, maybe. And this was kind of the final iteration. We're in site plan now, and hopefully going to be in construction here for the end of the year. Hopefully, site plan is that's part of professional practice. I don't want to talk about that in this presentation because it's more of like what engineers do. And so this is another project, Maury High School. So Billy had Maury High School on his Instagram, and that was the only reason I knew it was not Blair Middle School, is because I was looking at that project recently. This is a historic high school in Norfolk that we were part of a team. I should say, school was proposed to be torn down and a new school constructed, and the historic neighborhood was not happy with that decision. And so we were part of a team that submitted an unsolicited proposal to preserve the school and convert it to apartments and still build a new school with all the components that the previous proposal had. The Norfolk School Board heard that. They voted to open RFP process. That has now since been submitted, and we are awaiting the results patient. I think we are the only people that submitted. So hopefully there's a chance. So this is the site. So this is the existing school. The first phase was kind of this piece, and there's been bits and pieces over the years. There were additions done in the 20s. I think it was 1910 was when the school was built. Additions done in the 20s, additions done in the 50s, additions done in the 80s. In the 80s, it was kind of a recladding of the school and filling in of spaces. They kind of some sports fields components, but like they play football over on ODU's campus. So that's not a huge part. And then we had the ability to use this space over here as well. So again, we start thinking about that history and sort of, you know, what was the site. So we talked about Smiths Creek, and like the church was here. So Maury High School is here. And so it was like the headwaters of Smiths Creek. So like it was wetlands. You know, it's probably what it was during the times of the Chesapeake tribe up until they started filling it in late 1800s. So there's some farmland in there, I'm sure, that was dredged. We're really good at turning swamps into farmland. And so we, you know, researching, finding some photos. This is 1910-ish construction photo. Somewhere in there, I think you can see a horse and cart, but I don't recall. Postcards, man, eBay is like full of historical postcards. And they're great resources. I mean, you can see a lot of the landscape that, okay, this was here, this was original, you know, they were thinking about it then. But during this process, we had a few things come up where we've designed it and the site's laid out. We're like ready to go to rendering, and the preservationists will come back and say, oh, well, this addition from, you know, 1920s needs to be saved. So we reshape the parking lot, we accommodate that, and then we get one from like, well, this addition from the 1950s needs to be saved. That doesn't really seem like it's as significant. And so we start thinking about like what was happening in the 1950s in Virginia with desegregation of schools, and Virginia was really anti that, and even closed schools so they didn't have to let Black students in a lot of places throughout the state, especially here in Norfolk. And so I began looking at see if we could find some photos of school in the 50s, because we wanted to save it. And then also we looked at some Google Street View of like what that addition might look like, because it was going to change the whole shape of what we'd done, basically start over. So oh, missed a spot. This was the 20s. This was the addition in the 20s that we had to save. This is the photo I found from the 50s. So yeah, this was the addition in 2012. It's just clad in 80s brick and windows, and there's no significance. They at least cared about the landscape then. Now that's not even significant, but guess what? That tree's still here. There it is, still there. So there's that history. And, you know, I think we need to talk about that. Now, this won't get shown to, you know, in any public presentations, or this is the unprofessional practice presentations. It's not the professional practice one, but I think it is something we should all think about as designers as we're working through this process. So think about all of these things and like what was our sources. And so we think about wetlands. We think about, you know, this was once wetlands. So how cool is it if now I can come back 300, 400 years later, put wetlands back? The revenge of Smiths Creek, if you will. Like Norfolk's one of the worst places in the country for flooding. So like it's coming. So these are just some simple sketches, but there's sort of initial source concepts. And then we had an area of the site where we were given, here's your landscape area, essentially. You can have some public trails, you can have your wetlands, have your waterways and all of that. And so we started thinking about like, what do those shapes of those paths look like? We overlaid some of the historic maps. They didn't really vibe well. So we started thinking about like oysters and the history of oysters to our region in Hampton Roads, and like looking at the anatomy of the oyster, and then kind of like dissecting that and looking at how that can create paths. And, you know, wetlands and oysters both do pretty similar things as far as filtering pollutants. And then from there, you know, should we win the project and actually get to design the planting plans and all of this beyond just the grandiose conceptual aspect, we said like, what do wetland plantings might want to look like? And so when we think about what do they want to look like, I think about matrix planting and that style of design, like Pete Wolof and Benjamin Vogt things. And that made me think of the camouflage pattern that Pharrell just released. And as we talk about whose history, and we talk about Pharrell being one of the most famous people in the world, but also being from Hampton Roads and being tied to that community, and like, can we take something that the second Black man that's now the head of Louis Vuitton Men's House has created and apply that to this site that didn't necessarily have that history, and utilizing this pattern as our planting plan. So here's our concept plan of the site. So this would be our camouflage greenway, blueway of wetlands and oyster anatomy inspired pathways that would extend through the site, connecting over here to the neighborhood, connecting the site all the way across. Maury High School currently is basically fenced off. And so I think this kind of opens it up. I know there's other layers there with school safety and things. And fortunately, that's someone else's clearings. And then we've incorporated the sports fields as needed. This would be the new school building where the old sports fields were located. And the pieces of the school that would be preserved, the 1920s edition, be converted to apartments, which Norfolk is in drastic need of always, even though everyone seems to think otherwise. We don't have a lot of affordable housing. We have a lot of people. And so bring it back to everything. The universe never explains why. I don't know how I ended up here. I wasn't expecting to be here today. My journey through landscape architecture felt very much it was going to be in a corporate setting, and I was going to do this, and I was going to retire, and I was going to do that. That was it. And I've been fortunate enough to have the universe present me with lots of different opportunities. I hired Ariel right out of college, 2019. We were working for a civil engineering firm. When COVID hit, they decided they were going to lay her off. Thought she had a lot more to offer than just about anyone else I was working with. We asked them to lay us both off. And now Ariel's the boss. She hired me. And so less than a year on college, she founded a firm. In 7 days, she had our business license LLC website built, and we were up and running in 2 weeks. And so you never know where it's going to come from. So just be on that constant lookout for that source and that seed, and seek it, listen for it, and just be wary of it. And design is what you do. It's 24 hours a day for me. It's not like I go to work and then I'm done. You never know. Like, so much of this came to me in the shower or out walking or any given thing. So just don't turn it off, except for those times when you have to turn it off. It's a different time, and they make substitutes for that, everything. So here's our sources, our drawings, and thank you all so much.